Today, we're joined by bassist Peter Brendler, a dynamic musician whose versatility spans upright and electric bass. A Baltimore native, Peter honed his craft at Berklee College of Music, where he graduated Magna Cum Laude and later earned his master's degree from Manhattan School of Music. He has worked with jazz legends like John Abercrombie and Victor Lewis, and he's performed at legendary venues like the Blue Note, Birdland, and the Kennedy Center. As both a sideman and a band leader, Peter continues to make his mark with acclaimed albums such as The Angle Below, Outside the Line, and Message in Motion. And we're looking forward to chatting with him today. So, Peter, good to see you.
Great to see you. Thanks so much for having me.
Oh no, it's my pleasure. As I'm reading your bio, I'm thinking I have a very similar situation to you when you go to Berklee College of Music, and then after Berklee, you decide to keep studying. So,
Right.
when you were at Berklee, was it kind of like, there's so much more I need to learn in a scholastic sense? Because some people just go straight from music school or Berklee, like right to New York. So kind of talk to me about that thought process because you're in such a good place today.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I mean, actually, was not that at all. It was very an unusual path for me to get more education. I finished Berklee and I was in between moving to Chicago or New York, and it was kind of a coin toss. I had a good friend who I was going to be moving with, and we decided to move to New York. That was the summer of 2001. Found a place in August, kind of got my, getting settled in about September 7th or 8th of 2001 over that weekend. And then September 11th happened. And so that was a crazy time to just be getting to New York. I was uptown and I was, just kind of getting started that morning and, about to kind of go find some day job or something like that. I had my resumes printed the day prior. And so everything sort of stopped there. And I was just kind of like trying to figure out what to do. I was in my apartment and, spent a lot of time trying to, figure out musicians to play with and get to know people. And I was living close to Manhattan School of Music. And so I ended up becoming close friends. One of my best friends to this day, a guy named Jon Irabagon, great saxophonist, was a student there. And in something like February, after the deadline had already passed, he said, "Hey, they're really looking for bass players. So if you're, you're looking to go back to school, it might be a good time." So I applied sort of on a whim and got a scholarship. And I was like, all right, cool. This is be another couple of years of, education. And it was really helpful in some ways. I made some great connections there. Gary Dial was a fantastic teacher and influence on me. Jay Anderson and Dave Liebman was running, a program there. So that was fantastic to be able to connect with those teachers as well as all the students there. So I'm glad I did it. But it was something more that I kind of fell into rather than a grand plan or anything like that.
Well, what percentage would you say going there, contributed to the things that have happened in your career? Because again, it's about connections, but at the same time, I feel like a lot of what we learn in this industry is just in real time on the bandstand, just being out and about. So
Yeah.
do you think that, like, what if you were to, give it a percentage, like how much do you think it helped you? Because there's a lot of people who want to continue their music education, they're not sure. So what would you have to say to those younger students per se?
And I get asked that question quite a lot because I meet a lot of younger musicians who have just moved to New York or kind of, been here for a few years and they're thinking about going back to school. I think that it can be very valuable. Information is great and learn as much as you can and take it all in. The problem that I was fortunate to get a scholarship to go to Manhattan School of Music, and I received that, I think, not so much based on my merit as a bass player, but because they just needed bass players. They were like, I know that there were some really great saxophone players that were there that didn't get a scholarship, and I was like,
Well,
wow.
did you feel a little weird about that? Because Manhattan School of Music is really hard to get into. I mean, there's so much competition who want those spots. Meanwhile, they need bass players. I mean, it's got to feel a little bittersweet at the same time. I'm someone who didn't get into
I
Manhattan School of Music, so
Yeah, no, I was happy to be there and I was grateful for the position. And, like the old adage you always hear is like, everybody needs a bass player. And that kind of, even though there's a lot of great bass players in New York and around the world today, more so than ever, I think that still sort of holds true. It's like you'll get invited into positions that you might not if you're a trumpet player or something like that. And that's just kind of the way it shakes out. We do a lot of schlepping on subways and stuff. So I don't know. I was happy to be there. I guess what I would say to younger musicians is that if it works financially for you, that's great. But with the cost of higher education specifically, I think what I would do if I had, some money and I wanted to further my skills, I would find all the great players in New York and say, "Hey, can I take some lessons with you?" Because there's a, as you know, a sea of incredible musicians in New York, and most of them will give you a lesson for, $150 or something like that. So you can get a lot of bang for your buck studying with, somebody like Jeffrey Keyser, who teaches at, Juilliard or whatever. It's like, go get lessons with him.
Sure. Well, I think the good approach nowadays, just the way things are in the world financially, so to speak, would be to do a program like Grant Stewart has this program, which is
Right.
basically almost getting those jazz classes you get at a university. I would say to somebody, go do that, get the private lessons like you're talking about,
Yeah.
go out and hear music, and
Yeah.
you should be getting, majority of what you need. However, there's that just added pressure these days, it's been going on for a while that we have to go to school. Otherwise, if we don't go to school, we're not going to be successful. And if we're not successful, we're not going to end up playing music. So it's
Yeah.
almost
Yeah.
kind of like ingrained in our culture as musicians that, or,
Yeah.
young kids that they need to do this or something. But meanwhile, I feel like just so much of the experience you get is just outside of the classroom.
Yeah, and I think that's absolutely true. I mean, it's hard for me to put a percentage, and I kind of dodged your question that you asked earlier, but I remember when I was at Manhattan School of Music, I was really trying to get my repertoire to better, trying to learn more tunes, which is, taken me a long
How
time.
many songs do you think you knew at that point under your belt conservatively?
Oh, I don't know, a few hundred or something like
Right.
that, but is it, depending on what scene you're in New York as a working bass player, you might need to know 1,000 or a few thousand, and I certainly don't know that yet, but I'm still working on it. But I will say, I remember I got to, I've worked with some really great piano players in New York, and I learned so much from them about how to approach learning harmony and so and by understanding how harmony works and therefore learning tunes that way that I didn't learn at Manhattan School of Music. I remember being like, wow, I wish I kind of had a better idea of all these functional harmonic patterns and how they work. Really, like there's kind of a formula in the Great American Songbook songs, and if you can understand that harmony either at the piano or whatever instrument and start to hear it, it simplifies things immensely. And that was something that I learned from other piano players. They were like, "Oh, just think about this and start in the two dominant chord." And I'm like, "Oh,
Yeah,
wow,
when you're
okay."
forced to learn songs, I remember I took a class at Berklee, a repertoire class. I'm not sure if you took one of those or not.
I think I
Where
had that, or maybe I just missed it. I don't
well,
know.
you're a little older than me. I graduated 2008 from Berklee, so you graduated
Okay,
around probably 2000 or something.
2001.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so a little bit older than me. But they had like a repertoire class, and I would say about 50% of those songs I don't remember
yeah.
how they go because you're just forced to learn it in this unorganic way as opposed
I
to
remember
hearing
at
like you're talking
Berkeley,
about.
my first teacher. Did you know Whit Brown at Berkeley at all?
No, I didn't. I didn't.
He was great. He really helped me out. But he was like, I was pretty green when I got there, and he was like, "All right." He kind of saw that he's like, "I'm going to give you a lot of work, and if you do it, we're going to get better." And I was like, "I'm in." And I remember he had me learn Lover, and he said, I want you, this song gets played in two keys. It gets played in C and E flat. I was like, "All right, cool." He's like, "So I want you to learn in both keys." I'm like, "Okay." And I remember sitting in a practice room and writing all the changes out in C, and then writing out in the E flat, and without any sort of real comprehension. That's like, oh, it starts on this chord and the bridge goes up a major third. And, like I didn't have that. I didn't, it took me a while to start hearing those kind of things and to start intellectualizing those things. And that's super helpful. That's, as soon as because you get on the bandstand and I'm sure you've been in this position where someone's going to give you shorthand. They're like going to say, okay, like, the A section's a rhythms changes kind of thing. And the bridge is, honeysuckle rose. And you're like, okay, cool. It's like when you have those reference points and you've played thousands of tunes, you kind of get so that becomes more intuitive and it's a much quicker way to learn things and also a better way to retain things, I think.
Sure. And you're also from Baltimore, which is close to DC. There's a
Mhm.
great scene in that whole DC area, people playing in both cities and in, parts of Virginia. Were you cutting your teeth before going to Berkeley or was it
No,
just
actually, I left Baltimore when I was about 16. My family relocated to Chicago. So we moved to Chicago my junior year of high school. And that was in some ways really good for my music the beginnings of my music studies, because the scene in the high school that I went to had a good jazz band, so I ended up, playing bass in the jazz band there.
The one you were in junior year.
Yeah, where I went
Okay.
up to high school, and as I got a little bit older, I started going into the city, and so Von Freeman, legendary saxophone player, was still very much a force in Chicago when I was there, and so I would go a lot. He had a Tuesday night jam session on the south side of Chicago, like a part of town that I kind of didn't realize how bad it was. I would go down there, drive in from the suburbs, and get there at midnight and go and sit in. So that was really sort of some of my formative experiences. I've met a lot of great musicians from Baltimore and DC area since I've been here. But as you know, I left there as I just was turning 16, so I kind of wasn't on the scene there at all.
Well, it's funny because I just spoke to Frank Catalano like 2 days ago,
Oh, okay.
and he had a
Chicago guy.
relationship. Yeah, he has a relationship with Von Freeman as well. So yeah, I love these like hearing
He was
about.
the Bon was the best. He was one of these real deal jazz musicians. Like, he played all the time. I would go see his house set, and he would play, I mean, maybe like four tunes over the course of an hour and change, just really stretching. And it was like coming out of that thing of, tenor, I don't know if you ever heard that album Blowing In from Chicago, where it's just like these kind of big tenor sounds and, aggressive long choruses, really just chopping up a rhythm changes to pieces. I mean, so that was great to hear that, and then to get a chance to sit in and meet him. And he was very nurturing and super cool with all the younger
I
musicians.
love how you use the word nurturing because we have the other side of it, which are
Yo,
musicians who are very mean and harsh, which
yeah,
some stuff that I've experienced in my life would not be around today, just to how the way society and culture has changed and mental
I
health.
agree. Yeah.
Were you aware that the what he was doing, like being nurturing, that was almost like a privileged position to be in at the time? Because I'm sure you experienced like the other side there, you or saw the other side
Oh
of it.
yeah, I was vibed so hard some other times in ways that when I tell younger musicians the kind of things that happen. So I I can tell you this story. When I was in Boston, after I'd been there a few years and still was very green, I got the opportunity to play with a great trumpet player there named Darren Barrett.
Oh
Um,
yeah, I know Darren. Yeah, he's great.
he's great. I sat in on something and he heard me, and I was shocked. He called me a couple days later and asked me to start playing his gig at Wally's. And I did a couple and it was cool. And then he had the regular drummer come back, and that drummer basically, on the band stage instead was cussing me out and saying I'm not playing any more up tempos with this kid. I mean, it was really harsh, and I was gutted afterward. I was just like, oh man, I remember just feeling like I should just quit. And so, but he, can't say I'm thankful for quite the way he beat me up, because it really took it hard. But what I did do is I put myself in a practice room with some up-tempo recordings. The one I spent a lot of time with was Four and More. That there's two albums on that, and I played along with the one where they played Joshua and the blues that's on there. EF blues, like just unbelievably fast. And I would play along with those every day for 6 months or something like that. So I got more comfortable feeling, playing up tempos. So yeah, it is funny. I it's a much gentler scene now. There is definitely still some
I feel,
violence.
it is definitely gentler, that's for sure. But I feel like the first time I ever went to a jam session in New York, and I was so horrendous that
Mhm.
I knew everything I needed to learn right there, and I was not gonna bother going back at least for a year or
Mhm.
two, because I felt that like I needed to. I'm like, I learned right there, and then in a couple of songs at a couple different places, I'm like, I am nowhere ready, you know.
Yeah.
But I think
And I
that's
get
the
and
whole
it's
thing. I think the music speaks. That's where we should learn from it, though. That sort of thing.
yeah. And this is a big realization. If I can speak to this a little bit, because this is something for me in my encounters professionally and also in my own practice that I really try to prioritize. And that is to try to take your ego out of it, and try not to do the character assassination thing where you say, God, I just suck, I should just give up, which I used to do. And I think a lot of musicians do. And to more say, okay, here are challenges. How do I overcome these challenges? And to try, and I think the really great musicians are able to compartmentalize those challenges and find solutions to them. Like a lot of what we do as musicians on the bandstand in our practice rooms is problem solving. Say, hey, like I I'm not very good at up tempos, and that doesn't mean I'm a bad person or a bad musician. It just means I need to find a way to practice up tempos, and so you do that, and you're like, well, I'm not very good at syncopation or whatever, as long as you're honest, as long as you're willing to take out the magnifying glass, the microscope, and look at your own musicianship and see the flaws in it and not run from those, but rather embrace them and say, okay, cool, now I know what I need to work on. That's how you make progress. And it's taken me a long time to get there because for so long, like, I'm like, oh, I'm just going to avoid that.
Do you know Nat Janoff, the guitar player?
I do know that. Yeah.
Yeah. So, we were talking and he was like, we were having this conversation, like, you can't do everything. It's just like not possible. Like
Yeah, sure.
there's just so much to do. It's just unrealistic.
Absolutely.
Otherwise you would have to never leave your house if you wanted to do it all.
Yeah.
Do everything. I'm talking about learn everything in every key, every song, you know what I mean? Play everything in every tempo. It's endless. It's infinite. So
yeah. And not to mention, I mean, I love classical music. I love Brazilian music. I've been studying classical music, you know, relatively seriously for quite some time. And I have to be careful that it doesn't take over because I'm not a classical bass player, It's like, so it's very important to find your path and find what you want to do and make sure your practice and performance and everything is revolving around that or moving towards that goal.
that's very well said. Do you do other styles as far as gigs with pop music, rock music ever? Do you have to still do any of those gigs, or is that kind of,
Yeah. I mean, not
back?
as much as I used to. I do, and I like it. This electric bass is sitting here. I don't
Well,
play
Peter, I wouldn't have asked if I
it.
didn't see the electric bass. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, I wish I didn't. It just sits on the wall here. I don't really play it that much. I use it for writing sometimes because it's right next to my computer. But, every once in a while, I did a big band gig on Sunday, and there was three tunes that they wanted electric bass on. I was like, oh man, I haven't, and fortunately I put in enough time in it, and the upright kind of translates pretty well to it. But I wouldn't feel comfortable doing like a real, heavy chopsy electric gig at this point. I just not my. There's people that do that and spend all their time doing that. There's a great interview
There's amazing jazz players, world class, who still do these types of gigs maybe once in a blue moon or something. And that's something I don't think is aware. No, I'm sorry. I don't think that's something most people are aware of, that even if once in a blue moon they might get a call to do some sort of gig and it's thousands of dollars and they do it, that sort of thing.
Yeah. I saw a great interview with Ron Carter where he was talking about playing electric, and the interviewer asked him, you know, what happened? How come you stopped playing electric? And he said, well, when I started, it was sort of on the beginning of the instrument, it was just getting used in jazz. And, so I was doing things on electric and it was cool. It was never really my instrument, but I was fine. He's like, but by the mid 70s, you had guys like Stanley Clarke and Jocko who were really playing electric bass. And he said, I just realized I couldn't keep up with those guys. So I was like, man, if Ron Carter's saying that, it's okay to pick your battles. You don't have to be, I mean, there are guys like John Patitucci can do everything. Christian McBride can do everything, but those are very, there's a very small selection.
Yeah, those are the geniuses who can do anything. Like, if you could put Brad Mehldau in any setting from a big band to like it does not matter. They're just certain people who are just geniuses.
Yes, I am not one.
At least I feel that. No, I feel that. I mean, you're certainly a world-class musician and stuff,
Thank you.
Unquestionably, and are super, super, super talented. But you understand. We're talking about Christian McBride and Brad Mehldau. We're kind of putting them in another category, and there's nothing wrong with that either.
Yeah, and that's again, that's something I find the psychological path of a musician. I mean, I'm sure maybe other careers have this too, but it's interesting. It's taken me a long time to realize it's okay to not be a genius. It's like I used to feel like, why can't I have perfect pitch and hear all these kind of things? And it's just like, okay, well, everybody's does things differently.
Well, the genius is the one most like himself. That's what Monk said, right?
I like that. That's a great quote. I don't know that one, but that's a great quote.
If you're just you, then that's it.
Yeah,
then you are a genius unconditionally. Then
that's great. That's a fantastic and yeah, and I think about that when I realize that some of the other than if I really fold on something, which will happen, the times I'm most disappointed in myself is when I feel like I'm not playing by my own personality. Is when I feel like I'm, oh,
Well, what do you mean like not playing by your own personality? Like you
so like sometimes I'm in a situation and depending on who the circumstances of it, I feel like I might not be 100% what I want to do as a musician. And not even, and sometimes it's not even intentional. It's just like, if I've played with somebody and I've listened to a lot of their records, I might start unintentionally playing like, a bass player that's on their records a little bit more. And then I'll be like, why am I doing that? It's like I want to be me, and just play how I hear things. But, you know, as we all have, I've checked out a lot of music and really admired certain bass players heavily. And sometimes, like if I ever got the opportunity to play with Oscar Peterson, I'm sure I would be trying to do my best Ray Brown impersonation, but
yeah,
like that's not what I should be doing. But it'd be so hard to land up in that position and not be like, well, oh my God, I love that so much. I want to do that thing. So that's
yeah,
a
it's
that's an
very
ongoing.
hard to play with people that you're fans of. That you get to
Yes,
work with. It's challenging at least it's been for me in the
absolutely.
past.
I continually find that people whom I've listened to forever and I finally get a chance to play with them, like, I didn't do as well as I could have, but you
Is
live
there
and learn.
anyone? I mean, because anyone that you would name that you feel comfortable to say like I play with them and I wish I could have done a better job because I'm was such a fan. It's almost
You know,
hard.
I've been playing with Mark Copeland a bit lately. I don't know if you know Mark, but I
Yes.
love Mark. I just played with him yesterday, and I always feel like it just because I've listened to his music so much, and we have a friendship. We're cool, It's like it's just I adore. He's worked a lot with Gary Peacock, and he's worked with Drew Gress a lot, and those are two of my favorite bass players. And I've listened to those records, so I'm like, man, it's it's an onus I'm putting on myself that I probably shouldn't, which is like, oh, those guys did this. And so, it's that ongoing realization that you can never be someone else, so you shouldn't try, but it's hard sometimes to get that sound out of your ears, you know?
Yeah. No. So you did a gig with him yesterday, or was
We
it?
just played a we just played a session up at his place in
That's awesome.
Cowboys. Yeah, it's great. He's a wonderful musician and a concept of harmony that, boy, I would like to understand better, but it's just very different and really cool, you know?
Who would you like to work with that you just haven't crossed paths with yet?
Oh man.
I mean, the list. I mean, we all have certain people. Like, who would you really love to play with? Like that you just would
You
be.
know, I mean, I'd love to play with Brad Meldau. I know that's kind of like I'm sure that's an answer from a lot of people, but I've listened to his music a lot. I just read his biography, which I thought was fantastic. And so I would love to connect with him just because he's such an inspirational person to me. I just saw Walter Smith. He bizarrely came to a gig that I was playing, and we reconnected. We went to school together years ago, and he's playing at the Vanguard. I would love to play
Sax
with
player. Yeah.
Walter. Yeah, we played, at Berklee years ago, but I would love to have another opportunity to play with him. And I mean, there's a lot of great musicians that they're out there. Although I have to say, one of the things that's been kind of just different for me as I've gotten older, I've realized and gotten a chance to play with some of these people whom I've idolized. It's great and I love it, but I also really love playing with musicians who are my really close friends who I think are fantastic musicians. Like the saxophone player I mentioned earlier, Jon
John.
Irabagon.
Yeah, John.
He's unbelievable. He's like one of my best friends, and we did a record last year. We're going to do another one this summer. It's so comfortable and fun, and it's like sort of the other side of the equation. I know I can be 100% myself with him, and I never have to worry about doing something that
Have you guys? One of my good friends, he's a jazz pianist. He plays piano in the U.S. Army band. We were having a conversation about a week ago about just the way we think in terms of creating lines
Mm,
with different scales and just how we approach it. And we had this just a conversation, and we realized we think completely differently. And we play
mhm.
together all the time. We're like when it was one of my best friends. Have
Yeah.
you had certain discussions like that where you talk with your friends and almost say like, wow, we are on such a similar mindset or very different mindset, but we gel together? Like, have those conversations ever come up?
Yeah, I think a lot about how improvisation and how translating ideas to the instrument works. And so I'm curious with people. So I have talked about that. I think that one of the things, let me go for a sort of roundabout answer to this question. I'm sure you've seen these, some sort of clip on YouTube or something would be like, here's the one way to learn jazz improvisation. Like this is the way they'll take you. And that's something that's sort of prevalent in education, in jazz education in general. Is like this is the way you should do it. And I think that's always inherently going to be wrong because everybody's process is so different. Like I okay, so for example, digesting vocabulary, like learning licks, right? I think it's cool. And I have friends, another real mentor of mine is Rich Perry. I love Rich's playing. I think he's an amazing saxophonist. I know for a fact that he transcribes, a lick and he will really work on it and put it in places and take it through keys and stuff. And it comes out in his improvisation. After a while, it comes out really organically in his improvisation. I've never really been able to do that. And that's not for a lack of trying, but I always just felt that when I tried to learn a lick that way and keep practicing it, it just, I don't know, it didn't work for me.
And
So I found,
that's totally fine. That's the
yeah,
beauty of it. You have your process.
exactly. And so I think that that's really something important. Obviously, that doesn't sell, get clicks on YouTube. Like, here, find your own process of doing this that will take decades, and then you'll, eventually end up as a unique musician. Like that doesn't work. People want to see like,
Well, it's the long haul. It's the long
yeah,
haul.
yeah. So yeah, I mean, I think maybe that's an example is just, somebody who I respect immensely. We've played a lot, made a lot of music together, and we approach things quite differently. I, have sat with him and seen his process, and I love it. It's just different than mine, you
Yeah,
know?
no, awesome. No, Peter, this has been great. This is such a, you have such a great perspective and just the way you were so honest about it and humble. Like, I really appreciate you, taking the time to speak with me today, and it
It's been
means a lot.
the pleasure's all mine. Thank you so much for having me as a guest.